Hello, friends. Welcome to yet another Testing Peers podcast. My name is Chris Armstrong, and tonight I am joined by the wonderful Russell Cracksford,
Hello.
the beautiful David Maynard,
Hello.
and the ebullient Bruce.
Hello.
That's right, I used words. Congratulations on joining us. So, tonight we're going to be speaking about square peg, round hole. But before we do, we want to just say a special thank you to our sponsor, Saffron QA, who continue to be our sponsor. They're also here to support the testing community, and therefore, should any of our listeners be in the market for a new job in testing or hiring new talent for your team, please reach out to Ben. He can be contacted via email at ben@saffronqa.co.uk, and further details can be found in the show notes. Thankfully, this week, listener, Chris isn't doing the banter because we've got a Bruce. So over to you, Bruce.
Yeah, so I was actually wondering this outside of the podcast in general, but what wakes you up in the morning, either literally or motivationally?
For me, it's two things. It can be two things. Firstly, it can be just I automatically get up at the same time. I don't necessarily always need my alarm clock in order to get me up. So often it's just light and just knowing it's that time. The other thing that would actually get me out of bed is, to a certain extent, exercise. Getting outside, either walking the dog, going for a run, and just getting organized for the day, just getting my head round, knowing what to expect for the day.
Nice. I like that.
It's interesting because I think need is the thing that wakes me up in the morning. It's like actually attending the a meeting, like having a purpose, a point, a thing to be for. So like if I have a meeting at 7 in the morning, that'll wake me up, get me up. If I have a meeting kind of at 9, that'll wake me up, get me up. Coffee definitely helps. I'll not lie, but I can function without it. I'm a grumpy 3-letter word following grumpy. So yeah, so that's probably what gets me up really, is just kind of a reason, a purpose, a point.
And Chris, what
Yeah.
time do your children get you up?
Oh, before 6. But there are occasions when I'm awake before my children. In moments of sort of seasons of our lives when we're a bit stressed in life, sometimes I can wake up in a bit of a sweat or in a bit of an anger because I've not truly processed things, in which case I have the pleasure of waking up at 3 or 4 something. But in the finer moments when I get to sleep better, my kids will guaranteed be up before 6 to bring joy and sunshine to my life. But it is quite nice if they come and give you a hug as well, so I can't really complain. As for waking up, I now do morning commutes walking around my village, and I drink coffee.
Bruce, what about you?
Oh, I'm a person who wakes with the light like you. I quite like my dogs wake me up, to be fair. That's pretty much it. Between 6:30 and 7:30 is when Moog wakes up and she needs a wee. And if she needs a wee, she is going to have a wee, regardless of whether I let her out the door or not. So I'd better get out of bed, basically.
I was going to add, sometimes, as Chris said, sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and things are going on in my head. So what I have is, I call it my splurge journal. So basically, I have a book next to my bed to just write down all those the things that are firing on my neurons. I don't necessarily do anything with it, but my brain then accepts that they are filed away somewhere, and I don't really necessarily refer back to it, but it just calms my brain in the middle of the night, so therefore I can then go back to sleep, and that's really worked for me.
When you call it a splurge journal, I thought you were going to talk about sort of some problems and needing to go to the toilet in the middle of the night.
No.
So strangely, when you said you waking up because of a need, that's when I thought you were going to be talking about that.
Maybe that's just subconsciously there somewhere.
I should probably seek more tips on how to get back to sleep if I wake up. I'm sort of unsettled. It's one of those funny things we talked about advice. Like with my kids, I can talk about them and go through tips and tricks and these things. For myself, I just lie there getting more and more frustrated that I can't go back to sleep. But on with from one frustration to another. Square pegs and round holes. Now, listener, if you don't know how we come up with topics to talk about, we were just talking about various different things prior to hitting that record button. And we were talking about how sometimes we might be using tools in not quite how they were designed, maybe not by implementation. And it sort of got us thinking about, are we in life encountering moments where things are being used for not their real purpose? I mean, I used a crowbar for some gardening this weekend, folks. Like, are there things that we're using the wrong tools for the wrong things? Are we putting the wrong people into jobs? What are our experiences? What are our frustrations, friends?
I'm going to first of all say that a crowbar is a really good tool as a seed drill. So I get that, and it makes perfect sense. So sometimes the wrong tool can be the right tool.
Well, the motivation here
But
was I have a habit of breaking spades and forks because they're not strong enough when I'm trying to dig up tree stumps. Crowbar, not broken one yet.
yeah, see, makes some sense there. I think there's a lot of square pegs around holes. I think from what you've described, it's that I'm still when we talked about the topic title, people came to me more than tools. Yeah, software, automation, and particularly, you kind of see people over engineering, under engineering, some complexities of trying to take out requirements from Jira and automate them into another system and things like that sometimes happen. And you just kind of go, but why? And like traceability matrices and things like that, which again, them themselves are the right solutions, but the way in which we mangle things together sometimes gets quite interesting. There's quite a lot of tools, certainly in the sort of automation space, where you just got to wonder why sometimes.
I'd agree with tools, especially. We have tool vendors that come and try and sell us what they think we need, and actually the thing they're offering, we would want to use it in a very different way to most of their other clients. And that's always a bit tricky, because then we turn them down and go, well, it's not. And they go, then they name big companies that it all worked for. And we go, yeah, but we aren't that company. We are completely different. And that tool, in the way you're offering it, won't work for us. So thank you very much. And they just don't quite get that sometimes.
I have a similar thought there. Just as you were talking, it reminded me sometimes of the tool we offer our users in terms of the app that my company makes. Sometimes you workshop with users, test users, and create a flow that's going to work for people that they really enjoy using. And then you put it out into the world, to the wider user base, and find that they are not using it how you intended for them to use it, or even how your test users talked about it or used it. So we've had some really fun test scenarios that come up where we thought initially, oh, technically a user could do that, but it would be an edge case, like a beyond the edge. We don't need to worry about this sort of case, and then find out that something like 40% of your users are using the feature in that way because it solves a different problem for them than the one you intended the feature to solve. I always find that really interesting. And it happens surprisingly often. I don't know if that's just us being really bad at planning or poorly. I wouldn't say that we poorly understand our users. We're very keyed in and we are our own users. But I still think it's really funny how you get a variety of different people, and especially people from different age groups, who have different ideas of the paradigms and patterns that they want to see in apps. That's different maybe to how people who are more tech savvy would want something to work. So it's always really interesting there sometimes that the user is the, square peg in the round hole of the feature or something like that.
There's a lot of stuff where assumptions or generalizations cause a lot of problems. This weekend I was watching a documentary. I can say words. A documentary on the making of the GoldenEye computer game. And when they started making the game was before anyone had ever seen a Nintendo 64 controller, even the folks who were making it. if you've ever seen the controller for the Nintendo 64, you'll discover there were 3 bits you could hold, but we only have 2 hands. So the design, the design of how you held the controller was very difficult, and they had to make a lot of assumptions because there was no precedent. There was nothing they had before. They had a lot of ability that they were able to lean into because of that and be a bit creative. Whereas these days, I think if you had a first-person shooting computer game with the 2-stick controllers that people have these days, there's a lot of expectation that I know when I do this, it will invert and I'll move there and I'll do those things. But they had the freedom to establish what new might look like with a totally new interface, which I think is a privilege that not a lot of people get. But even still, when something brand new comes in, we can still get things completely wrong to what was expected and how it was done. I'm sure the people who first designed the Scrum methodology didn't anticipate that it would become a set of very strict rules that everyone would do, and that would automatically make them agile, for example.
I don't know. I've read a book that makes me think maybe they did think that, but I think my example I'd have there, you reminded me in terms of innovation and pushing boundaries, and sometimes making mistakes, is that Apple mouse, the magic mouse that has the charging port underneath, so you can't use it while you're charging it. When you are making this, we're going to have the sleekest, cool design. You're not going to be able to see anything from the top. So obviously the only place he's got one. The only
Yep.
place that you
Podcast
can put
going.
the charger is underneath.
It's so annoying.
Mm.
Doesn't need charging often, but when it does need charging, it's like, what do I do? It always dies on you when you need it, because obviously it dies more likely overnight. But yeah.
So that's less a case of square peg, round hole. It's just like the square hole is in the wrong place. Have any of you felt like you were a square peg in a round hole? Oh, I see some nodding.
I was very nodding. I think a lot of the problems with square peg round hole in terms of people and roles that we have in the workplace is that job descriptions and CVs can often feel very general, and you know how to talk about various topics and you know how to answer those various questions. And often when we're recruiting for people, we don't know exactly what we're looking for. And you sort of meet them and go, yeah, they seem to meet the general vibe of the job we're looking to achieve. And you get there and you land on your first day and you discover the job doesn't look or feel like that which you thought was advertised. And maybe you start showing a bit more of your personality because you're not under interview conditions anymore. And you start to show your sort of glue work kind of desires, or you have a particular leaning towards something that's really
Eurovision.
Eurovision or accessibility, maybe. Your personality comes out and you start to feel more comfortable and confident in various different things and go, oh, well, I don't like that tool. I'd rather use these sorts of tools. These are my approaches. Somebody maybe mentions a particular methodology and you're like, no, that's not my thing. And you can feel that there's a clash that can happen because let's face it, an interview is a very short moment in time. It's like speed dating for your profession. It's a very small period of time you've got to get to know people, and first impressions don't really give you that. And and so when you land in a role, it can very quickly feel like I don't get the context of where I'm working, but for me as a person, and I felt like, ooh, this isn't what I was expecting. And I know that I will have given employers the same thing. And sometimes you can have open, frank conversations about these things. Sometimes you can flex and change to that. But it's very uncomfortable when you feel like you're being forced down a path which isn't for you, and you're kind of aware of those sorts of things. I've seen people forced into Scrum Master roles when they very much didn't want to do that, or felt like they had to go out and learn Python, even though they were hired as a manual tester, for example, and they were a bit intimidated and scared, and they didn't take pleasure in joy in those things. Um, and so, you know, there's I don't know how you fix job descriptions and interviews and those things, because especially in today's market when everything's online and very fast.
Do you think agile, I'm going to say agile specifically, encourages almost round holes and square pegs and sort of situation? It encourages us to be adaptable, therefore increases the risk of in the wanting to be the team player, wanting to step in and do something where you may be the best fit, but you aren't the right fit, if that makes any sense. And the idea of standing up and saying, none of us should really be doing this. We need to get the right person or the right tool is seen as the anti-pattern. Therefore, you actually encourage people to throw their hat in the ring, do things that are maybe not for the right reason, it's for the best of intent, but not necessarily like to have the right outcomes. We want to be the adaptable over anything else. You know what I mean? We want to squeeze ourselves into the hole. We will force ourselves, even though we're the wrong shape, hoping that we kind of can find a way in, or that the hole's big enough.
Or you become a human putty and force yourself into
Yes,
the hole, mold
exactly, that
yourself
sort
into
of
the
thing.
hole.
So yeah, I just think sometimes that our need for agility encourages these people, like you mentioned, Scrum Masters, which is probably what triggered me. The amount of times I've seen testers in particular step into that role because they're the glue within the team, connecting people, the product owner, the business analyst, the developers together. They've got some of the technical knowledge, some of the user knowledge, some of the people knowledge. So they fit into that role. But do they? Don't they? Often it's the best, least worst option rather than the right option. And it just triggered that to me because I remember I've seen a lot of testers also want to do it, not necessarily the right shape either, but they're the least worst option. It's interesting watching that dynamic happen in front of you.
Yeah. And I think not just in terms of agility, but it can feel like a resourcefulness thing, you know? So I really love working in startups. It's like my jam. It's where I love to be because, on the one hand, with what Chris said, you don't as often get that situation where you're not the person that they want because you might be the only tester in the company. So you get to define the standards, which is a lot of pressure, but that's really cool. You sort of define what your role is according to what your specialism is and what you enjoy, so long as you're, getting things done. But on the other hand, you have to be super duper resourceful and have your fingers in every pie. You're probably cooking the pies, you've made the pastry, you are the filling, you're pretty much everything, right? Because you have to be super duper resourceful because it's a startup that has a certain amount of money, and when that runs out, that's it. So regardless of agility, I think the desire to be resourceful, especially in this economy.
It's that team player thing, isn't it? Again, your motivation could be agility, it could be wanting to be the helper, the pleaser. There's different dynamics that cause that, but it is interesting.
I was going to go back, I always do, to Chris's point about new jobs. I will take it forward a little bit as well. But most of the jobs that I've gone for, I have on the lunchtime of the first day sort of taken myself away and often thought, what have I done? What have I done? I've made a mistake. And often, obviously, most of the time or all the time, it's worked out. But there is always that. Most of the time, it's been that moment in that first day of I've made a big mistake. I was also going to say that everything we've discussed so far, especially with the agility, working for a consultancy, every time you are given a new project, it's a bit like a new startup. It is that thing of why have they chosen me? Is this a step too far? Am I able to do this? How much can I define? How much am I able to do in this particular role? So having that chance to almost reinvent yourself and to move forward is always really helpful. But that's part of the reason why I like working for a consultancy, is because of that feeling of actually, it's the excitement of doing it again rather than having a particular product company. Yeah, I enjoy that sort of excitement as part of that, and I think that's the nice thing, because actually, although initially you might think of yourself as a square peg in a round hole, you can sort of shave off a little bit of your squareness in order to fit the hole without being human putty to force yourself in. And so eventually you can sort of mold yourself
Yeah,
or
you can
change the
definitely
shape.
adapt. That's the thing, isn't it? You can cross skill, upskill, change skill.
Yeah. I think that's one of the reasons that I've stayed in my current job so long, is that I've had those opportunities to change teams. So I was in a very front end heavy team, and I had an opportunity to choose to stay on that team or to move to a newly formed API, no front end whatsoever team. And I had that question, am I going to be am I the right shape for that role? And definitely in the first few months, I was feeling very keenly that I was the wrong shape for that role in every single way. But as you say, you shave off the edges, you get a bit of wood filler and put in some on the side, and you learn new things. And now that's enabled me to come back to the original team with a new skill set that enabled me to better fill the hole in that team. So sorry, it's really disturbing me talking about filling holes. Like, am I going to fit in this hole? It's so weird. I'm regretting this title choice.
No, but it's interesting though, because sometimes you can be right or a tool can be right, but just not for now.
Mm.
I've crossed paths with people who would have been perfect to work with, not right now. And I think we can be guilty sometimes of wanting things to work because we know in the future these things will work. Maybe we're a bit stubborn, um, or it's optimistic and you're trying to manifest it by forcing these ways through. Um, and I think a lot of humility is required to sort of accept that while I've seen this work before, I know this will work. Sometimes your context, your people, your culture isn't ready, isn't available. Sometimes you're not going to be there to see the fruit of the success, of the hard labor that gets put in uh, for those areas, and that can be quite difficult. Because at various points in my career, I've been convinced of various things that absolutely should happen, but it's not for me. It's not for that time, and having to accept that I'm a square hole. There's a round peg. That doesn't work. A round hole and a square peg. Anyway, I don't fit.
It's all about the sizes of them, isn't it? It
It's
doesn't matter which
it's
shape.
about the size and the shapes and things, and that you maybe you don't fit that well, and it could be that you're desperate to learn a new language because you can see that the direction of the things you want to lean into, that's something you want to learn. You want to get invested in a new tool or a new direction, and the organization you're working for hasn't got desires for that. Maybe you're a cut and dried full blown agilist, but you're a consultant and you've been dropped in the most like waterfall heavy organization in the world, or you find yourself selling an agile transformation that is definitely isn't agile. Like there are moments when we have to accept that these things, no matter how true they might be to us, aren't for now, and we have to accept and understand context. And we've talked a lot about compromise and remodeling and shaping ourselves, but I think there's a point at which you have to still look at that core ingredient of what's important. You know, what is the value of this thing? What is it? Is it important to me? Is it important to us? I hate ROI, but what do I get back for investing my time and effort into these things? What are the benefits? Am I just doing this because somebody said it should be done? And I know as testers we question a lot of things, and I think we have to continuously do that. Just because it's the way it's always been isn't the way it should be. Just because it works for me doesn't mean it works for you. And that's quite difficult to be self-aware and self-reflective as often as we are, when maybe everyone around us doesn't give a crap. It's quite an interesting dichotomy. It's another sort of element of square peg round hole, where sometimes you can feel like you care more about things more than the rest. You're more concerned with the risks, you're more concerned with the customers or direction. I'm not saying that's always the case, but I think you can often feel like a bit of a sore thumb, something that's sticking out.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point to make as well, is that if you go somewhere and you're a round peg and there's a square hole, it's not always you that has to change to be the square peg, right? Sometimes you have to get the saw out and make yourself a round hole. I remember this is going back now, when I first joined my current company, they'd had a tester who'd worked on the team for something like 6 months beforehand and then left. And they had this huge, big manual test management cases, just tens and tens and tens, probably hundreds. And each of them had these little manual steps, and you could click in and it would say, oh, this is for the magic login email thing. And one of the steps would be, open your email account. Expect your emails to be there. And I was like, I'm not testing Gmail. That's not my job. And, engineers would say, have you tested it against, all the test cases? And I'd be like, no, I opened those test cases once and then I closed my browser and slowly backed away and went and made a nice little mind map. So sometimes, you don't have to accept, like you say, you don't have to accept the way that things have been done. Although there's going to be times that you feel that you have to, and sometimes the answer will be that you can't change it and you have to go somewhere else. But there's always balances, isn't there?
Yeah. Sometimes you change the peg, sometimes you change the hole. You've got to figure out what it is, and you've got to do the analysis. You've got to figure out what, as Chris said, the return on investment. You've got to figure out whether it's the right tool is good enough, the better things out there. And like a lot of things, it's about assessing it in the best you can, the time you have. And it goes, that's personal choice. If you're asked to do a role that you're maybe not familiar with, or you see others doing a role, it's about, well, are you the best person in that moment to do the best you can? And sometimes you have to adapt to the situation. But you try and make sure it's temporary if that's the case. Or you learn, you evolve the role, you evolve your skills. But yeah, it's not going to work forever. If you keep trying to bash it in, something generally ends up breaking. And that's the point. So you've got to make sure you understand what you're risking for that reward, and so that you adapt the appropriate way with the right things, and you have the support. It's great, like, we talk about shaving things off, but if no one's giving you the tools to do that, and you've got to do it with your fingernails, very painful. But if someone's actually giving you access to training material, someone's showing you what's right, someone's mentoring you, that'll help you. If someone's training you on a tool and you're using it, let's say you're using Rest Assured, do exploratory testing of an API. You can do it. Definitely possible. Possibly overkill. But if you're actually using Rest Assured for your automation as well, and then we're adapting it to use it to help you explore, there's a lot of benefits and things in that case. But if you were just starting off to use Rest Assured for exploratory testing, I would question the logic. But again, if you have the right context, you have the right information, you've got the framework that enables you to do things, then you actually can use these things. But it's all about that context changing, adapting it, and making sure you, as a tester, I guess, assess, understand the use case, the reasons, the motivations, the what, the why, and how you can interact with it best, how you can get the best outcome. And knowing when you're not testing a risk anymore, you're testing Gmail, as we just mentioned, that you're actually going beyond the reasonable, and that you have to challenge, stand up, stop, pause, scream, sometimes. I've done that before.
There was some screaming involved.
There's also the fact of knowing when to stop, when to back away, when to change, or you know,
Hmm.
it's all very well. We can all battle to, but there has to come a finite time. And again, it's a return on investment. It's the it's making sure that the right people know. It's informing the right people that can make decisions, whether it's us or other people. But it's having the strength to go, enough is enough. Things have got to change for some reason. What I'm trying to do here is not achievable, or it's not helpful. And that doesn't necessarily mean to say that you have to leave the company. It doesn't mean to say that you have to, be really drastic and throw all your toys at the pram, or it just means that you need to inform the right people that can make the right decision in order for things to change in the right
And
way.
sometimes you want to just sanity check things. I think sometimes we can get so caught up in our own context, our own bubble, our own situation, that maybe we can't take that step back. We and sanity checking with other people. Just, am I crazy? I'm going to explain this situation. Let's talk about it. That's why therapy exists, but also it's why good friendships exist. And you can say this situation, and sometimes taking that step back, breathing, being given a different perspective can allow you to rationalize and sort of come to terms with things. Sometimes I think a lot of the time, the thing that blocks us most from adapting or changing, it can be ourselves, and getting sort of caught up in these bits, and talking about it's really valuable, because it enables us to sort of make sure that we're not alone, and that we're able to sort of think a little bit more removed from the emotion of the situation, to be able to, yeah, feel a bit more pragmatic. I like to say I'm pragmatic, but sometimes I get a little bit sort of reflex, and I don't like it. And talking to people has always helped me to sort of resolve in myself where these things are, and to make better, more well-reasoned decisions going forwards, or at least suggestions, and being participant in areas, rather than just sitting there and being just generally a bit cross.
Yeah, and I think having really good support and people that you can go to inside your team or in the company is also really important. It's something that I haven't had in all of my roles, and something that I'm very, very grateful for at the moment. I have an amazing manager, name drop, Amy Roberts Hode, super awesome. She's just so good at getting through problems that I have and helping me to find the solution, or even just to say, no, you're right, that's not an acceptable situation, so we can deal with this, you know? And I think that even just somebody who is a quote unquote above you saying, you're right to feel this way, or you're right, this is a big problem, thanks for bringing it up. That's just so, so important. And it's not something that everyone has in their jobs. So I think it's really awesome.
I was thinking about before when we were talking about changing and adapting, it's having, as we said, sounding boards, so that actually we can do that effectively. We have to adapt, I guess is the point. We have to adapt to the situation, and we need those people around us to help us get that feedback, I guess is probably the word I was looking for. If you're trying to bash in a square peg in a round hole, you've got feedback, you've got resistance, you've got friction. I guess that friction is something that should be a trigger to tell you something's feeling right, something's feeling wrong, something you need help, you need support. And it can be, if you're, this is management or people, it can be the people around you giving you feedback that they're uncomfortable, they're not happy, or that could be better, or you're being very restrictive, you're being a gatekeeper. You can get any of these feedback could help tell you that actually there's an adaptation here. There's maybe a skill, a knowledge that you're missing, or could be better, or you're not communicating. It could be that. So, all these things give you feedback, and that feedback helps you be better. And it's the same with like using a tool doesn't quite work. If it seems to be a lot more hard work than it should be, if you've been sold this idea of nirvana and it doesn't quite feel like that, that may be a good sign to check, to think, to review. I'm an agilist, I'd say, and retrospect. And that can be personal as well as kind of team. It can be role as well as anything else as well. So we always reflect, always look back, because it's sometimes hard to see in the moment. You just want to get it done. That's often the motivation, that you just want to get something out the door. And if you don't reflect, you might not be able to change things. You might continue to be just bashing your head against a brick wall. That will drive you insane. Because I've done it.
You've just made me think now about, bashing and trying to shape into the hole. And we're talking about sometimes changing the hole, sometimes changing the peg. I think there's also valid situations where you have this peg that's like rammed in, stuck halfway through the hole. And sometimes it's completely the right choice to make to just leave it there and not try to change anything and not move anything. At least in some shorter term, I'm thinking about, we have these end-to-end tests that we went through lots of different options and ended up creating with a particular framework. And it seemed like the best option at the time. So we went and we created these end-to-end tests, not, a huge thousands of them, but enough. And later on realized, oh, this particular framework doesn't support sending really good logging through to browser stack, Lambda test, whatever you use for real device testing. And that is a really weird small annoyance that is annoying for debugging and finding out what's gone wrong and what's happening in those mobile test runs. But it has to get to a certain point before it's worth going and changing the tooling that you're using, just so you can get better logs or something, So I don't think it's always the right choice to change what you've done or change your direction. Sometimes it's okay to just sort of leave that peg sort of sticking out of the wall and maybe hang your coat on it and walk away and whistle. Yeah.
I think that's a fantastic time to wrap up. So what we'll do is we'll say goodbye. So thank you very much for joining us. If you want to give us feedback, if you want to help us and tell us how we're being a round peg in a square hole, or a square peg in a round hole, or any other shape in any other shape, feel free to reach us. You can reach us at contactus@testingpeers.com. If you're interested, we are planning another Testing Peers conference next year. You can see us at testingpeerscom.com. And join us again next year for that. That's in March. Thank you again to our sponsor, Ben at Saffron QA. And thank you again for listening to us.
For now, it's goodbye from the Testing Peers.
Goodbye.